Fans, to another edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. And today we're very pleased to welcome Sheriff Brady Nimmons, who is a former WCW competitor and talent and has a lot of good old school stories. And of course, by the one, the only coffee drinking King of Connecticut. How are you gentlemen today?
Anytime I get to look at a picture of the King of Court, then it's a good morning.
Yeah, it's great to have the sheriff on with us, and we must say that he does appear on the Hannibal TV. This certainly is not his first rodeo, because he was referee of the rather infamous match between myself and Miss Gina Carucci, the Strong Island Lolita, against the late great UFC Hall of Famer Stephan Bonner, and those buns of distraction and satisfaction, Miss Summer Steele. And I urge folks, if they haven't seen that match, to watch that match here on the channel. And, when I left South Kakalaki to come down here to the Sunshine State, Mr. Nimmons became the most superior swordsman in South Kakalaki. I mean, it can't be understated. I mean, this Mr. Brady Nimmons, Sheriff Brady Nimmons, he makes Wilt Chamberlain look like Mr. Rogers. I mean,
but Deputy Sheriff, I don't know if that's exactly true, but go ahead and tell the story.
Yeah, so we got to get that 800-pound elephant out of the room here, because going back to his WCW days, he was known as the eye candy for all the divas and all those young ladies. And a lot of folks might have heard this, and I want to kind of clear the air and say that it is true that Reina Mero did at that time. She was, of course, with the other brand. A lot of folks knew her as Sable. She did fall like a blind roofer for Sheriff Nimmons, and Sheriff Nimmons had begun his career in law enforcement, and he is so highly regarded in that regard in South Kakalaki. I can say, having been a former homeowner and resident in Richland County, South Carolina, and Reina, it was unrequited love. Reina begged for the sheriff to come and run away with her. I believe she wanted to go to Monte Carlo, was her fantasy, to be in Monte Carlo with Sheriff Nimmons, as the story goes, and he let her down easily, and that was after she had lost all of her love and feelings for Mark Mero, and he let her down easily, and then she ended up, of course, with having to go a few steps down from Sheriff Nimmons, and ended up with that big lug Brock Lesnar. So yes, that story is true, and Sheriff Nimmons is the most superior swordsman, dare I say now, perhaps in the entire Southeast. And we could spend hours talking about his conquests in that regard, but we're not going to do that. We want to get into his career in WCW and some of the great stories that he has. So, Sheriff Nimmons, why don't you tell the people a little bit to start about your football career? You were a stud football player there in Irma, in the Midlands, and then you had a great collegiate career, and somehow found your way into professional wrestling in WCW. So give the fans just a little background on the man behind the badge.
Well, I played football at Irmo High School, the same high school that Dell Wilkes, the Patriot, played football at. Of course, he was several years older than me. I think about 8 or 9 years older. But that's where we played football at. And I was just graduating college, and it didn't look like I was going to be a pro football player. So I was thinking back to what other sport, I might could go pro in. I was training kickboxing pretty hard. I was kind of a sparring partner at Bobby Mitchell's boxing gym here in Columbia. That put out a couple of pro fighters, Don the Man of Steel, among others. And then I just, I had to watch wrestling since I was probably pre-kindergarten, and I decided I wanted to do that. And I talked, I really had that on my mind as kind of a backup plan for a long time. I talked to Dell about what the best way to do it was, and he told me about the power plant in Atlanta, Georgia, and he told me what all you'd have to go through and whatnot. And I had actually a couple of friends of mine in Columbia that went before me, Scott Vick, who became Sick Boy with the Flock. We were training at the same gym. Another guy named Craig Phillips, who was an offensive lineman at University of Carolina. He actually went in, he joined, but I don't believe he ever actually did a match. I know he got hurt several times, but both of them went to the tryout before me. And when I showed up a month later, first week of August of 1996, Craig had lost about 70 pounds, and Scott he was down from about 270 something to 240. And that's just a result of the training there. And I think Craig hurt his back after that. But yeah, I went through the 3-day tryout and made it.
Yeah, we want to backtrack just a little bit. And you mentioned Del Wilkes, the Patriot, and arguably the greatest football player ever to wear a Gamecocks uniform. Tremendous athlete, and folks know him in professional wrestling as the Patriot. I had the absolute pleasure of hosting some Gamecocks events with him at the old Burger Tavern 77 Match Vansky's spot in Columbia, South Carolina. And man, what a great athlete, what a great guy. He recently passed away, and I want to give you the opportunity to speak of your friend Del Wilkes, the Patriot.
Yeah, well, actually, the last time I talked to him, he had called me up about doing a podcast. We're going to get Sarge on there, and Wrath, Brian Clark is going to, I think it was a Tuesday, called me, and we were going to do it on Sunday. Matter of fact, I was working. I was walking around the USC football stadium just to stretch my legs out, and I went over to a board that had his name on it. Has all the team captains from like the 1800s on. And that was the last thing we were talking about were the wrestlers we knew who died. And again, said, we'll do the podcast on Sunday. Next morning, I flip on the phone, and there's Del Wilkes, RIP, all over the Facebook page.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but we want to talk about his life and his legacy in South Carolina with the Gamecocks and with professional wrestling, both WCW and the old WWF. So talk a little bit about what he meant to you in your life as a football player and a professional wrestler.
Well, the first time I talked to him about getting into wrestling, I think I was maybe 20, 21 years old, something like that. I believe he was American wrestling or whatever he was doing, the trooper gimmick at that time. He was not yet with WCW. I remember we went to a boxing ring somewhere, and he showed me a few basic things, worked over lockup and just some other things we could do without really having a good padded surface. You can't run boxing. run the ropes in a boxing ring, and that kind of gave me a little head start of what it was about. And then, you know, he's a good guy in the gym, being about 280 pounds lean. If you wanted training advice, he was good helping you with your weightlifting. So he was always there. Now, we trained at a gym called Sports Gym forever. And then right around 93 or so, there was a Gold's Gym that opened up. And I think we both got a membership there. And that's where we had a real last conversation about what to do to get into wrestling. And actually after that, well, he was Federation, then I was WCW, but I'd still talk to him from time to time. He always has some pretty good advice and telling kind of inside stuff about what's going on.
Yeah, you know, his tag partner was Buff Bagwell there at one point in the old AWA, and I believe the last media that he did, Dell, was an interview alongside of Buff, and Dell looked well. So yeah, gone too soon, man. R.I.P. And you mentioned you trained in a boxing ring, and you're very well known as a combat sports athlete throughout the Midlands yourself. And we have a mutual friend in Mr. Stanek, good old Billy Stanek, who has a White Rock boxing gym. Give your thoughts, if you would, to listeners in the Midlands on Mr. Stanek and what he really means to the community there.
Yeah, Billy Stan's a great guy. He I can't remember the year, somewhere around 1993 or so. I'd somehow or another I ended up at his house, I know, to watch the Foreman Holyfield fight. That's when I first met them, because I had a friend of mine who was trained at his gym. Then I remember a couple of years later, Dad, I was doing some martial arts, and then I talked to Stanek. I started working with some of his boxers. I remember he took me, and I'm trying to remember his name. Stan Huey was one of his pro fighters. And we did a lot of training outside. We'd go to, like, I think a rec center where we'd like run a little course, and he'd hold the mitts for us. And that was probably my first introduction to boxing.
Yeah, you know, if listeners want to see the gym that Billy Stanek owns in Columbia, it's actually up in the Valentine, South Carolina area. They can go to an interview that I did with world kickboxing champion Anna Crutchfield, who was from the upstate, and she's in there in the ring and talks about her career and talks about Mr. Stanek and what he means to her career and her father, and it's a great interview. But yeah, it's such a cool area. You know, I lived in the Midlands for 13 years and love the area. And Sheriff Nimmons is a legend there in the Midlands for so many reasons, as a sheriff, but also as a combat sports athlete. I know that when we first met, Brady, you were training with Mark Mills, and I've had the occasion to do seminars there at his school. And we wanted to bring the Beast in, Dan Severin, in for our program for training law enforcement. And Brady's always been about having the guys be as fit as possible, and talk about what that means to you, you know, in your life, fitness and combat sports.
Well, I remember I had a weight set at the house, and I remember when I became real religious about lifting, I cannot remember the name of the show. It might have been The Fall Guy, but Lou Ferrigno played the bad guy in it. He worked at a hospital. I remember the episode, and he was a serial killer and believed he was the incarnation of a tiger. But it showed him working out some that afternoon. I remember right after that episode was over, and I think I was in 7th grade, I went out in the garage, and, you know, then I started workout then. And other than, even since then, I was 83, other than like taking a week off recovery, I don't think I've missed a week of working out since then. And, you know, I tried to get into martial arts somewhat around 12 years old, but I didn't really started training consistently into that till probably 90 to the late, well, no, about 2002. That's when I met Mark Mills.
Yeah, and all of that training that you've done coming up, and your football career as a collegiate football player and a high school star really helped you with the power plant. And we talk in old school shooters of how rugged it should be and how difficult it should be to get into the business, and it really was with the Sarge and with WCW. And there's a guy that folks will know very well from the UFC that came through there when you were there. Brady, you want to tell that story?
Chael Sonnen. Yeah, I didn't know who he was at the time, but he went through the tryout, and I mean, I didn't. That's before he became a name in mixed martial arts. But I've seen him on. He's got a YouTube video. He talks about the training center, and he said at the end of it, he barely made it. And emphasized by saying it twice, he barely made it through the trial. The trial was pretty brutal. We had about an 80% fallout rate there because really, to get WCW at the time, the deal was you just didn't quit at the trial. If you stayed, you were on. And I think I had 12 to 15 in mind. I know I had one guy that claimed to played football for Southern Cal and some other people. And there were 3 of us finished it. And one other guy came back, but he didn't stay around that long. That was in my group. But after it was over, they called me in office and they were honest with me. They said, we don't see any superstar potential in you, but we could be wrong. And they laid out how hard it is, but said, if you want to come back, we'll train you from here on out. We'll do everything we can for you. And I lost a good bit of weight trying to get into cardiovascular shape to be able to make it through the trial. So I think I was only 215 pounds or so when I went through the trial. It said, you need to put on a lot of weight. You got to get a lot bigger than this. And actually, that's how Ernest Miller breaking my arm helped me out. I'd actually gotten smaller from the training. I dipped down to about 195 pounds, and they were flat out, we're not putting you on TV looking like that. And I was doing a training with Ernest. I threw a spinning back fist. He set back in a knife hand block, and it broke my arm. I didn't even realize it that day. About 2 days later, it seemed like it was still hurting. And so I went to the doctor and had an x-ray, and you could see the bone clearly severed. But anyway, the 4 months I had to wear a cast, I was able to eat properly, work out, and I built up to about 230 pounds, and that was good enough for them. That was very lean, 230.
Yeah, and you've got another great story from that time period about Bill Goldberg.
Goldberg, he was a great guy, great athlete, but I remember the very first day he came in, he didn't have to try out like the rest of us. As a matter of fact, I think they put him on contract before he did anything. And he finally was like, talked to Dallas, said, well, I've been getting a paycheck. What am I supposed to do? And then he found out, said, well, report to the training center. But I mean, they put him through pretty hard a couple of days, and he decided what he wanted to do. But I remember one day in working out with him, because, his famous line is, who's next? We were training and we were doing something in the ring. He was immediately to my right, and he was hung over the ring trying to catch his breath like everybody else. And he looked at me and said, what's next? I said, usually we go outside and run wind sprints. And he said, I'm not doing any wind sprints, and then hung his head back down.
What's next? Yeah, that's a great story. And before I turn things over to Gentleman Jack, I just want to ask you real quick about you were pretty tight with the hard body Harrison.
Well, when I first went there, I needed a place to stay. He invited me to stay with him and another guy, and that was an experience. Yeah, I didn't stay with him about 2 months before I moved out and got another place. But yeah, I mean, I trained with him the whole time I was there. I rode some indies with him. He had an indie show that he did. I worked at, and yeah, so I got to know him very well.
Yeah, and folks know his story
and it's actually, his story is not that dissimilar or out of place for professional wrestling. If you read my book Rough and Tumble that I did with Eric Paulson on the history, we talk about Mildred Burke. She was the first big lady wrestler. She came out of the carnivals, and she and Billy Wolf were basically, and I'll just quote Frankie Kane, the great Mephisto from the book. What he told me was, if you wanted to be a wrestler, you had to fuck both of them and whoever they told you to. So that was similar to old Hardbody. So it kind of gives you the shady backstory to women's wrestling. And I want to turn things over now to the man that folks affectionately know as Gentleman Jack Kilby.
Thanks, King. I wanted to ask you, Brady, about you had a match back in the day on television when you're teaming with David Heath Gangrel, which I'll ask a follow-up on, but it was against the Faces of Fear, the Barbarian and Haku, who I guess was going by Meng at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about, and I understand from our pre-conversation that was, you had a total of one pro match prior to that on the indie circuit. Can you describe the experience finding out that I guess you see your name against theirs on the board, and what they were like, given the fact that Barbarian, for sure, no disrespect to him, but Meng Haku is one of the most renowned, if not the most renowned, tough guy in the business.
Yeah, it's unusual to do that after only one indie, but what happened was, I'd done my independent match, and Pez Watley it was a 6-man tag. He was one of my tag team partners. But anyway, time that I should have been doing the indie shows is when my arm was broke, because I'd been around about 5 months at that time. I had experience to start working, but anyway, like I said, my arm was broke. So when I came back, I went to the next Orlando thing, and there was a loft we were all in, I guess you'd call it. And, they had the ring set up, the crowd came in, and you'd see your name written on a board, what you were doing, who you're working with, and whatever. And it was written on me and Dave Heath versus the Faces of Fear. And at first I was like, who's Dave Heath? And then when I was introduced to him, I saw him around. I just didn't know who he was. So we started a tag team from there. And I'd already actually met Ming a couple of times. He was actually, as tough as he is, he's actually an extremely nice guy. I worked security at a WCW show about 2 months before I tried out, and I ended up getting in a conversation with him. He asked me to go bring his car around for him, and he was actually a very nice guy, so I wasn't intimidated by him, but everybody said, lay it in, said, whatever you do, don't act like you're taking it easy on him. They'll consider that an insult. Said we chop them, hit them, whatever, lay it in. And it did scare me a little bit in the match. I was kicking a Barbarian in the stomach as I was supposed to. And one time it just slipped right up and slapped him right in the face, like, oh, no, I'm going to pay for that. But he never mentioned a word about it. And it's well, you kind of oiled up, and he just kind of slipped and slid right on up there. But it was a great learning experience.
Do you have any other notable matches from your WCW tenure? I know you have discussed on the King's old program, King's Court, about your match with Glacier, who I understand a book is being written on as we speak by John Crowther, who did the great book on the Bushwhackers. Do you have any reminiscences from that match?
Yeah, that might have been my best match. It went perfectly, I think. It was close to perfect as you could expect. And, he was happy with it then. I was happy with it. He gave me a lot of offense. I got to use my finishing maneuver on him. It just didn't finish him. And I actually did a bunch of matches as they were always taking me down there for the Orlando shows. Scott Putski, worked a good match with him. First match I did, Lodi, with the Flock, Brad Kane, was a tag team match. We were at Hector Garza and Liz Mark Jr. Hector and Liz Mark couldn't speak a word of English going into it, and I thought I spoke a little Spanish. They couldn't understand a thing I was saying. And then the match went very well. And at the end of it, I think it was Hector walked by, and I said, "Well, I can't miss it." I said, "Muchas gracias." And he looked and said, "Hey, man, no problem." I'm like, "Where are you from?" He said, "Somewhere in South Texas." So he spoke English perfectly well.
Wow. What was the correct me if I'm incorrect, but you were in WCW approximately 96 to a year or so before the buyout from WWE.
Right, I was in 99.
99. What was the atmosphere like during in the company, backstage, etc., given the fact that that was a the most successful tenure any company not with a McMahon in charge had in terms of business, pay-per-views, draws, etc. What was that atmosphere like?
Well, it was great up until the end, but I remember, somewhere in that 99, I think he was in the power plant. Brad Armstrong, that actually is the first one that told me. He said, they're canceling the Orlando shows. This isn't going to be good. And from our perspective, everything was great, but ratings started slipping a little bit then. And when they did away with the Orlando shows, which canceled the WCW Pro and WCW Worldwide, then a lot of people weren't really needed anymore. And then they kind of started cutting at the bottom, and I was one of the first to go. When they moved the power plant to its new location, some went, some didn't. I was one of the ones that didn't. And then about a year later, they were gone. I think about the time that I went over to the new power plant was changing over. That's when Russo came in, and that's when everything started getting really bad.
Did you ever think about, and I know you continued to work after WCW on the independents, but did you ever consider or look into perhaps a stint with TNA or even trying to get into WWE at the time, or was that not on your radar?
Well, I got a job not too long after that with Department of Corrections, and then I knew a couple of people at ECW, and I went and I did a couple of dark matches with them, and it was okay, but their deal was this. There are a lot of people in the wrestling business that can be played easy. You give them a little carrot, they'll do anything. So basically they were like, "Yeah, you can come with us." I'd go to every show with them if I wanted to. No guarantee I was going to work, no guarantee of any kind of paycheck, but they'd have had me there if they needed me. And obviously you can't pay bills off of that, but there were some people that are perfectly happy to do that. But at that time, like I say, I'd already had a job that I got paid every week and benefits and whatever. So I wasn't going to go haul myself around the country with ECW to maybe work, maybe not, make 200 here, go 1 week without getting paid. So I didn't pursue that. And I don't think ECW really lasts a whole long time after that either.
No, very wise. Now on this show, we ask each of our guests, a philosophical question, if you will, and that is, what does it mean to be old school to you in these chaotic, some would say, very desperate times that we live in, when old school values, etc., seem to be in decline in some sectors anyway?
Now, are you talking about in the ring or just in society in general?
Just in society in general.
Well, it's like as an example of that. I remember about time I was in kindergarten stuff. My mom would take me grocery shopping or wherever. Be like, "Do I need to lock the door?" "No, don't even bother. We're not going to be going that long." And it was a different time back then. Stuff you see these days, you never would have really believed in. Even though I got short hair now, obviously I do a job. I've always been a big time metalhead, and I never thought I'd be kind of thinking that I'm the old school guy comparing old school values to do. But it's definitely, I agree with you. It's definitely going way downhill.
King, your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, we were talking about this with GGP, Jack. If you remember, I said how this music is destroyed, like it's part of the destruction of the minds of the young people. This mumble crap where you can't even hear what they're saying. And I love metal, man. And if you go back and you listen to, if you listen to Motorhead, if you listen to Megadeth, if you listen to old Metallica, if you listen to Ozzy and Black Sabbath, those songs, and you look at the lyrics, they're intelligently written lyrics, man. That a lot of times are about things on the world stage. You know, songs like War Pigs. Look at all the Motorhead songs like Brotherhood of Man. The lyrics make you think. They open up your mind in metal. And I'm a big fan of American music, going all the way back to original blues songs. And Brady will appreciate, our old hangout Hooters in Harbison in Columbia, South Carolina, when I had the beautiful young black girl on my knee, one of the servers and her brothers, and I was educating them on one of the first American blues song from the turn of the century, the song Delia, which has been remade by Johnny Cash, by Bob Dylan, by John Cougar Mellencamp, a lot of these white singers, but it was originally an old black blues song. And, I'm a soulful son of a bitch, Jack. You know that. And the way that I sing the blues, that's American music. The music has a message. And music defines the culture. It really does. We do everything on this show from Frank Sinatra. Of course, I've Been to Town is our theme song, to some of these country classics. And we're going to do one now to close out the show. But yeah, man, metal is old school nowadays. It's old school. And we are old school and proud of it. I tell people I've earned all these gray hairs. I've earned being a silver sage, being a beacon of wisdom to these youngsters. I was just coaching at the Rotary Wrestling Clinic here, or wrestling meet here rather, yesterday and Friday. And when I'm on the sidelines with these young athletes, I'm the silver sage. I'm passing on my knowledge, not just of on the map, but the knowledge of life to these younger people. And it's up to guys like us. It's up to guys like Sheriff Nimmons and you up there with your shoot job, Jack. It's up to guys like us to educate these youngsters, to remind men that they're men. And I've always said this many times, and Brady knows this in his own life. When you remind a woman she's a woman, she'll reward you for being a man. That's old school. We're old school. And I want to say, before I sing this song, I want to give Brady, talking about old school, the opportunity to talk, since he's got so many young ladies throwing themselves at him in the Midlands, about some of these witches. And I'm going to give him the floor to talk about witchcraft and some of these young ladies that are witches in the Midlands of South Carolina and throughout the South.
Well, it's kind of weird how me and the King got on the conversation of witchcraft, but then he kicked in, and he really had a lot to say about it. But there are witchcraft stores all over Columbia, South Carolina. You probably wouldn't even know what they are if you just rode by them. But how I get brought up, so I've had several girls contact me and tell me that I'm going to be theirs and this, that, and I tell them I'm not interested. They flat out told me, no, I'm a witch. I'm casting spells on you, and I've got stuff in the mail. One time I had this package supposedly from Myrtle Beach. I know it wasn't from Myrtle Beach. I had candles in it, gemstones, pentagrams, and You know, that's something a few years ago. It's like I didn't know anything about witchcraft. Then all of a sudden, I seem to be running into them everywhere. And so far, none of their spells have worked on me. I haven't gotten with any of them, but they seem like every one of them seem like they have some mental health problems too. I think the two kind of seem to go together. You know, just one last little example. Like there's a place at the mall opened up. It seemed like just a harmless gem store. And I walked in there and I just tested it. I'd walked up to the girl. I said, well, if I was buying a present for a Satanist or a witch, what would you recommend in here? Oh, anything in here would be a great present. And I'm like, oh yeah, and you practice witchcraft? Oh, absolutely. Okay. Well, you know what? When my payday comes around, I think I can come back in here. And that was the last time I was in there, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, you know, Brady and I were no strangers to the witches and the witchcraft. Like I said, I lived there in the Midlands for over 13 years. So that's just an aside. But you know, I love to close out with song, and I want Brady to join me just on the chorus, just on the last verse of this song, and I'll start her off here. And this is a song that was originally written and performed probably in the late 70s by the great Jimmy Buffett. And well, I'll sing it for you. I really do appreciate that you're sitting here. Your voice sounds so wonderful, but your face don't look too clear. So barmaid, bring a pitcher, another round of brew, and close it out, Brady.
How's it go? Get drunk
And screw.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm ashamed to sing next to the King. I mean, the King's got a truly beautiful voice. I could see him doing a duet with Stevie Nicks any day, and it just makes me feel like a guy 5'2" playing basketball, and a guy 7'7".
Thank you, Brady. I appreciate that. You know,
I hear it.
Thank you, Brady. I really appreciate that, Brady. And I'll tell you, I do some crooning down here in Florida with a fellow named Carlos Carr, who's from down in Chile, and he and his brother had the #1 show on television back in the 80s, and they were crooners. Came to Vegas, and now he and I entertain the ladies down at our friend Larry Motz's club, Bally Bar. It's a nice very old school supper club. Talk about old school. Do a little Dean Martin, and just as an aside, they used to call my grandfather, my mom's father, Dean, because he'd always sing Dean Martin to the ladies. And I carry on that tradition, and that's how I think we're going to be able to convert these witches, is through studs like ourselves, like the three of us, singing to these young ladies and teaching them the error of their ways.
Matter of fact, next time I talk to Dolly Parton or Stevie Nicks, I'm going to recommend they do a duet with you. I can see it being a top 10 hit, no problem.
I love it. Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Now, Jack can croon. Jack's a crooner. Jack, you want to, before I close out with the tagline, you want to give us a little verse from our lead Frank Sinatra song from the chairman himself, I've Been to Town?
No, I'll do a different one. I've been practicing. You've been kind of influencing me to expand my repertoire and fine tune what is essentially I think what I lack in verbal or orator ability, I make up for an emotion. Much like you, when I'm crooning something, you can't fake the emotion that comes out, and that's what the whole process is about, right? Conveying that emotion to the audience.
Absolutely.
So here we go. Just a little snippet, though. I don't want to saturate the audience, okay?
Don't give them too much, Jack. Don't give them too much.
I have a few, but then again, Too few to mention. That's it.
Beautiful. And I'll close it out. I'll close it out and then do the tagline. I've done what I could do. And might I say, not in a shy way. I did it my way. Silver Sages spread knowledge to the younger ages. Sheriff Brady Nimmons, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Old school shooters. Ah.